of our work on the blockchain and digital assets platform. So as you'll see, the subject of this talk is DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. And the bulk of the findings that I'm going to be sharing with you today came from a collaboration that the forum has been holding with the Wharton Blockchain Digital Asset Project, specifically from a white paper that we published back in June, which shares the name of this summary. So you can, I believe, find that in the links, and if not, I will post it in the chat following the presentation. So a brief agenda for you all. I'm going to go in and just introduce the forum, introduce the initiative that I work on at the forum, talk about the DAO project series, which is again, where the conclusions that I'll be sharing today come from. And then we'll be going in and actually doing some DAOs 101. So I'll introduce the concept of a DAO, speak about different categories of DAOs, talk about what are the strengths and weaknesses that we are seeing in this novel form, and then also talk about some of the key future issues for DAOs, which do tie to some other work that the forum has ongoing. So the DAO project series, this was an initiative that was convened about 8 months ago at this point. It is a collaboration of the forum and Wharton. And the overarching goal of this initiative is really to investigate the value of DAOs. So, we had been following the DAO space in the context of DeFi and Web3 more broadly for some years. And we felt that as of 2021, and particularly as of this year, the field had reached a degree of maturity where we wanted to devote time and resources to building a community and beginning to build insights about this novel and emergent form. We have 3 goals of the DAO project series. The first is really to produce research. So that's all about, investigating the value of DAOs across different use cases. We have a special emphasis on impact. Social impact is core to the work of the forum, and it's core to the work of the Crypto Impact and Sustainability Accelerator, here as well. So this is also an area that we are digging into. And we really want to be producing research on the topics of DAO governance, DAO policy, and also going into what are some of the open questions for DAOs, and what are some of the use cases where we see particular benefit for this new form of organizing. Second overarching goal that we have is advisory. And so here we really want to go a step beyond research and actually produce guidance that's relevant to our key audiences. So whether that is policymakers, regulators, builders in the crypto industry, experts such as yourself, we want to produce findings that are relevant to your work. And then third and finally, we are building a network around this topic. This is key to how the forum works. We don't just work in a silo, we build a community around the work that we do. And so this DAO project series, is currently supported by just over 100 experts around the world. They are DAO builders, they're policymakers, they are crypto experts. We really have folks from all different backgrounds that are represented in our network. The outputs of this work you'll see on screen at left. Those are 1, 2, and 3. So today I'll be sharing findings from the DAOs Beyond the Hype white paper. This was, again, our sort of DAOs 101, our first foray into the topic. We are in the midst of finalizing the DAO toolkit, which is our second resource, and that's going to really double click on a lot of the issues I'm sharing today. So if this presentation is of interest, I would encourage you to follow that work. Third and finally, in the winter, we're going to begin another piece of work on impact DAOs. So that's really going to dig in specifically on DAOs that are being leveraged for social impact. So first off, table stakes, what is a DAO? What is a decentralized autonomous organization? This is such a wide and active field and such a diverse part of Web3 that, as you could imagine, it was difficult for us to apply, any one definition to this area. So we landed on one that, we felt was broad enough to encompass a lot of the different activity in the space. And that's really around DAOs are entities, they're organizations that leverage blockchain, digital assets, and related technologies to do one or more of the 3 things that you see at the right of your screen. So the first is all around deploying resources. Probably many of the DAOs, if you've heard of different DAOs, have been focused on allocating capital. So we've seen the growth of a number of different investment DAOs, financing DAOs, DAOs that are focused on the purchase of Real world assets, for instance, we'll talk about Constitution DAO later in the presentation. They deploy resources to pursue a goal. That could be, purchasing an asset. It could be maintaining a decentralized social network. There's always a goal, in mind in a DAO. The second is around coordinating activities. So these organizations are not just financial in nature. They're also coordinating humans, people who are actually contributing through Discord channels, and actually participating in the day-to-day functioning of a DAO. And third and finally, DAOs are organizations that make decisions. So they are, entities that allow communities to come together and collectively propose, vote on, and ratify decisions. This third and final category is of particular interest to us at the forum, and I think, fair to say, to the community that we work with here, because I think it's really helpful to think about DAOs beyond this definition as experiments in governance. These are new types of organizations that are experimenting with different models of technology governance. How could you govern a protocol in Web3, or how could you govern an application, in a more decentralized or less decentralized fashion? That's the question that DAOs are asking. And excitingly, we're beginning to see thousands of answers across the DAO ecosystems. There's lots of exciting work to cover. So before I jump in a little bit deeper on what DAOs are and what they do, just a note on sort of defining terms. The term DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, is really a problematic one when you double click and begin doing on the ground research. A lot of our research came from working with developers and DAOs, actually going and reviewing information that DAOs were putting out there in the world, trying to understand these use cases. And what we uncovered is that there is really both a spectrum of how decentralized different DAOs are. Many of them leverage a hybrid approach, where you may have a core group of contributors who are managing something like a multi-sig wallet, like the financial or budgeting and allocation elements of a DAO. Whereas voting in general and sort of controlling the mandate, the strategy, the overall direction of a DAO, that may in fact be very decentralized, in a one token, one vote sort of way. So DAOs exist along a spectrum of decentralization, and they also differ in terms of how autonomous they are. But many do leverage smart contracts or automatically executing code to actually carry out decisions, once they've been made by the collective, and others are reliant on humans, on individuals, delegates that can be nominated to perform special tasks. So what is the history of DAOs? Interestingly, and this doesn't get a lot of attention, but the term goes back to the 90s. It was used originally in a very different context than the way that we talk about it today. Initially, it was used in the computer science field, and DAO was really about how could you connect different IoT devices, in a network and get them communicating and get them working with one another. It wasn't actually until, really 2014 that that notion of a DAO got picked up and inflected by all of the activity that was happening in Web3 around that time. So you had a number of different blockchain enthusiasts, developers, and Vitalik Buterin, co-founder of Ethereum, most notably, beginning to theorize about DAOs. And this comes at a time in the history of Web3 when individuals are thinking about how can you take the foundation that's been laid in Web3 and think more about governance. Such a core part of the work in crypto is all around bringing more stakeholders in, having more people who are empowered and have agency over the technology that they use. So the question was, how could you build a technology to actually support that type of engagement? And that's really when DAOs began to be theorized in crypto as entities featuring, and this is a quote, automation at the center and humans at the edges. So how could you build a sort of programmed organization that performed tasks that allowed people to engage in the governance of different technologies in Web3? It wasn't until 2016, so a couple of years later, that we began to see actual examples of DAOs, and particularly examples that break through Web3 and actually sort of go mainstream. And we see a lot of people talking about DAOs, thinking about them. And so in 2016, we've got the creation of the DAO, which was a community that came together and decided to pool funds to collaboratively invest in blockchain-based projects. So it was really an investment DAO, a financial and an allocation-oriented organization. What was remarkable about the DAO is that this community managed to raise in just a matter of weeks around $150 million worth of cryptocurrencies. Though of course the DAO became a kind of infamous example when shortly thereafter a bug was exploited, assets were siphoned off. It does stand as a great sort of early example of that ability for DAOs to rapidly mobilize a lot of capital and a lot of interest around a shared goal. 2017, we begin to see more DAOs being developed alongside a new field of business to DAO or B to DAO services. This is tooling and infrastructure to really support the processes of a DAO. So whether those are tools off-chain, like Snapshot to support voting processes in DAOs, or on-chain tools, like multi-sigs, technologies that can be used to manage funding processes for DAOs. This is really the period in 2017 where a lot of that infrastructure development kicks off. And that leads us into 2020, when we see DAOs break into DeFi, in a big way. They had obviously been a part of DeFi prior, but in 2020, we really see this explosion in the DAO space. And that leads to 2021, which a number of experts have called, the year of the DAO. So 2021, the landscape really explodes. Total value locked in DAO treasuries surges by a factor of 40, from around 400 million to over 16 billion at one point. The number of participants explodes, a factor of 130 times. At this stage, you've got, almost 2 million participants actually, interacting with DAOs in a meaningful way, on a regular basis. So 2021 is really the year when, DAOs maybe don't go mainstream for most people, but they certainly explode within the context of Web3. So all of this activity in the DAO space, that we are witnessing here at the forum, that our partner at Wharton is witnessing, led us to, want to begin researching and also applying more of a structured approach to categorizing the DAO landscape. One thing that's so exciting about this forum is that, it is so open and adaptable. You can use the term DAO to define communities that are doing any number of different things. But of course, that's also one thing that makes it really difficult to do research in the space, to navigate the space as a newcomer, to write policy around the space as a policymaker and enforce it as a regulator. And so that's one reason why a core output of this work that I'm sharing with you today was a taxonomy of different DAOs. So we tried to put together a simple table that would allow a newcomer to go in, look at a DAO, understand where it was situated in the broader ecosystem. So 2 questions here that are really critical to being able to categorize a DAO. The first is, what's its objective? What's its goal? Is its goal to power a network, or an application, something like, Ethereum or Bitcoin? Many people do consider those early iterations of a DAO, because they were used to govern and manage an application. Other objectives that are common in DAOs are, management of a community, right? So you can think about DAOs like a Uniswap, for instance, that manage, communities of, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of voters that are all contributing to making a decision about the future of an organization. And then you can also think about, is the DAO more ad hoc in nature? Does it come together to pursue a specific and bounded objective and then disband once it's achieved that purpose? There's a number of different objects that a DAO might pursue. Then the second really critical question here is all around means. So, how is a DAO intending to achieve that objective? You may have DAOs that are focused on, activities. So the management of activities, the management of a group of developers, for instance. Other DAOs may use value transfer to achieve their ends. So if you think about a DAO like the DAO, which I was speaking about a few moments ago, that was really about investing and allocating capital. And so that's all about, investment as the primary means that DAO uses to achieve its end. Third and finally, there are social DAOs, and those are DAOs that They manage networking and coordination. They're decentralized social networks. They are really coming together, to facilitate some sort of social purpose. You can think about also organizations like Friends with Benefits, bringing together Web3 creators to come together and build a community around that shared interest. So number of different types of DAOs, and would encourage any of you that are interested to look at this table, look at the examples, and begin getting to know some of the different examples that we've got down here in italics. So why DAO? As I mentioned, we've seen this massive explosion in the form. We've seen a whole host of use cases coming out, but what is the advantage that DAOs offer over alternatives that you might use to achieve the same ends? That was the question that we put to our community, and we came up with 3 answers. So the first is really around open source software, and of course this isn't unique to DAOs, but it is something that allows DAOs to be readily adaptable. So you can think about DAOs that have been generated by copying the code base of another DAO and redeploying it, and just rapidly spinning up a new organization with a similar governance framework and a similar process for working together. So that open source software really allows DAOs to kind of leapfrog and continuously evolve. The second element that makes DAOs different is, obviously their basis in blockchain. So the audit fidelity of a blockchain that powers that kind of accountability, as well as the ability to have programmable smart contracts, for enhancing decision execution, is another thing that makes DAOs unique. And then third and finally, economic incentives. This is probably maybe the most important reason why we saw DAOs take off initially, because they figured out a way to apply, game theory to incentivizing behavior in an organized fashion to get a group of people, could be around the world, contributing to a shared end. At the right of the slide, you'll see probably the most famous example of a DAO to date, Constitution DAO, which really came together, to do something very specific. It was ad hoc. It was to purchase, one of the 13 remaining original copies of the U.S. Constitution. This was obviously something of great metaphorical value as you're thinking about creating a new governance system. To buy a document as historically important as the U.S. Constitution. Of course, Constitution DAO infamously failed. A bidder came in at the last moment and outbid Constitution DAO's offer. But Constitution DAO did succeed in showing again how rapidly this type of new type of form could build a culture and a community around a shared objective and raise capital. Raised around $47 million worth of crypto in just under a week to perform this purpose. So we thought more about what are DAOs strengths, what are their weaknesses. These map to the points that I raised just before. I'll go through them quickly. The first is around accountability. So again, that blockchain powered audit fidelity, the ability to actually go in and audit that code, read what's happened, actually look at the ledger and say, this did happen, this didn't happen. Second is around programmability, so the ability to develop smart contracts, enhance efficiency. Third and finally, there's that economics incentives point. At right, you'll see a table where we break down strengths and weaknesses of DAOs compared to other types of organizational form, business associations, communities, things of that nature. On the other hand, of course, we've got the weaknesses of DAOs, of which there are many. There's limitations of governance in DAOs. There's a difficulty in a decentralized and kind of collective organization in defining roles, carrying out basic operational tasks like contracting third parties, paying salaries, paying bounties for tasks that are completed. This can really hamstring DAOs in both from a governance and an operations perspective. Technical limitations. So of course, blockchain technology, has limitations in many cases around efficiency, scalability. Because DAOs are blockchain based, they suffer from many of those same limitations. And then finally, there's a question of legal uncertainty. This is really a question of the policy and regulatory landscape that has not yet been developed to answer some basic questions around DAOs, like can they benefit from member liability, from tax planning, how can they deal with some of those basic legal and policy questions? So I'll spend a little time talking about some of the challenges, and maybe that's how I'll close out. So, first, there are practical challenges with DAOs. There's a cybersecurity and a scalability challenge that DAOs suffer from. There's also a challenge of pseudonymity. Pseudonymity, anonymity, these are core parts of certain DAOs and a core part of the culture of certain DAOs. And while it creates a kind of level playing field and an ability for folks to come in and not sacrifice their PII to participate, it also means that it can create, in some cases, harmful information asymmetries, disadvantages certain participants. Third and finally, there's a practical challenge of engagement. So in many cases, if you're a DAO contributor, you'll contribute to multiple DAOs, and doing that on top of a day job or just contributing to multiple DAOs in general can be time consuming. You can be up at all hours of night, reviewing a proposal and deciding which way you're going to vote. So engagement becomes a problem here. At right, you'll see one of the case studies that we did on Uniswap DAO around this issue of low voter turnout. Uniswap had an early proposal around reducing the proposal threshold, a quorum threshold for a proposal to pass, and ironically failed to get the number of participants and voters in on that to be able to pass that threshold lowering proposal. So just one example of how a lack of engagement can create a real issue for DAOs. Finally, I'll close by discussing a bit the legal challenges that DAOs face. So there's an issue of legal status. So the question here being, can DAOs fit within legally recognizable form? There's this evolution of legal wrappers for DAOs to try and help them benefit from the traditional things that corporations get, for instance, that LLCs get. So there's this question of legal status. Another question of applicable laws. So how does an organization that's decentralized, that's global in footprint, how does it recruit? How does it pay taxes? How does it compensate talent? And then third and finally, because of that global footprint again, there's this notion of jurisdictional uncertainty. What regulators are actually on the hook for making sure that these forms are complying with the law? So I want to close out if we have a few minutes with questions and feedback. But before I go there, I do want to just again mention that this DAO project series, the paper that you've seen presented today, this is our sort of DAOs 101. It's our primer on the space. We're working currently on a much more in-depth resource that's going to go into many of the policy, regulatory, governance challenges that DAOs face. And so you can look out for that in a couple months. It's going to launch at the forum's annual meeting in Davos in January. And then the work on that Impact DAOs piece will also continue thereafter. So I would encourage you, if of interest, to also get in touch with me with any questions, comments. You'll see my email listed on screen. So thank you all for the time. I don't know, Ramesh, if we have time for questions or.
We do. We have almost 6 minutes. Let's scroll down here and see what we got.
And Ramesh, we can go beyond that. It needs a few minutes.
Yeah, it's a break, right? So let me see. While I'm scrolling down this, so the governance toolkit, is that going to be, you said it's going to be announced in January? When is it going to be available to the public to play with?
Yes, that's correct. So the toolkit will launch at the forum's annual meeting. So that'll be mid-January. It'll be somewhere between January 16 and 20. We don't have the final date set, but around then the toolkit will go live. It'll be publicly available on our website. So that'll be another great way to engage with this material if of interest.
Got it. There's a question here. Is the UN weighing in on this issue?
So to date, we have not had engagement of the UN in the DAO work, but it's a really interesting organization, I think, in this context, right? Because obviously the UN is somewhat of a decentralized organization in its own right. And so we have had outreach conversations with different UN agencies around, are you engaging with this topic? What would be of use to you? And so we are thinking about how can we plug the UN into our Impact DAOs work in particular. So that is the work that'll focus on DAOs being leveraged for things like supporting sustainability outcomes, furthering financial inclusion. That work will pick up in the winter, and so we will be certainly looping back with different UN agencies that we feel could be valuable members of that community.
So you've been working on this for some time, right? This document and the governance toolkit. Who are the participants, like stakeholders? Are these crypto side of it, or do you have enterprises or government?
Yeah. It's a really great question. This is a topic that is of obvious interest to the crypto industry, and so we've got a great representation of folks that are actually building applications in Web3. So developers. We've also got a lot of legal experts coming from the crypto industry that are participating in this, and then we also have led, I think, a really interesting outreach campaign with governments, with policymakers, with regulators, because as I alluded to at the end, and this is something the toolkit will really go into greater depth on, many of the open questions around DAOs are going to ultimately be up to policymakers and regulators to answer. And so we see this as one way of putting out knowledge and research and creating a community that policymakers, regulators can learn from and can hopefully develop thoughtful and enabling regulation around this topic.
One follow-up question: there's still no legal clarity in terms of governance tokens. You could register a DAO in Wyoming, but there's not much you can do beyond that because the security laws, would come into the picture, and governance. There's no guidance from. I don't think there's any country at this point who has given any clear guidance on governance tokens. So how do you guys address that, or is that what you're trying to address in terms of educating the policymakers to do something?
Yes. So that is one of the hearts of this work, and we spend a good part of the toolkit of the upcoming report talking about securities law in particular, because we recognize that so many of these issues are not solely DAO focused in nature. Yeah. These are issues like securities law, like commodities law, like anti-money laundering. These are foundational issues to the whole of Web3, and in many cases to large parts of the financial service sector in general. And so we are working to build knowledge and advocate with governments around the world on these topics, because we recognize that those are going to be the really important answers we'll get from policymakers. In terms of how much progress we've made on that, I think that remains to be seen. Our role is really build the community, put out the research, do that advocacy work, and then we'll see where that ends up, and that will have really important implications for the DAO space when we do have that clarity finally.
One follow-up question: was DAO mentioned or discussed in the MiCA proposal, European Union's MiCA?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if DAOs were mentioned in particular in the MiCA. There was obviously so much in the MiCA proposal that is going to have massive implications for the DAO space. I will share that here in the US, there have been, this outgrowth of bipartisan bills, in Congress, coming through on crypto. If you followed the developments around the Lomas-Gillibrand bill, for instance, they did specifically call out DAOs, and they did have, a kind of principles-based, innovation-focused, orientation towards the topic. And so we are beginning to see DAOs explicitly come into, policy proposals around the world. But at the same time, to your point, Ramesh, I think that policymakers are still working to resolve those more basic and fundamental questions first.
So let's go to the chat box. Enough of my questions. I see a question from Mohan. What were the learnings from the first DAO failure? Yeah,
so that's a really great question. And I think that there were so many learnings. I think that on the one hand, there was a sense that, cybersecurity, thinking clearly through what are the considerations at a governance level that are being written into code and committed in a technical way that are going to produce outcomes that are going to be adverse to the intent of the DAO. I think that really the primary learning from the first DAO failure, as I have seen it, is that there was a much greater attention paid to when we first set up a DAO, when we, write those smart contracts, when we, find the governance framework that we want to use, thinking very thoughtfully about, well, so what are the attack vectors here? How can we ensure that the workings of the DAO actually goes forward as intended? And then I think the major outcome, and we had alluded to this in the timeline, is that in 2017, following the DAO hack, we really see the development of a lot of B2DAO, business to DAO tooling and infrastructure developed to try and mitigate some of the risks that the DAO failure made very clear.
David Gonzalez, your question?
Thank you, Ramesh. I'm glad you brought up the topic about cybersecurity. That's where I live, the realm where I do a lot of stuff on. Now, with the DAO and what's going on, because I understand it's global, are you looking at any of the US standards like through NIST or, because I also work for the federal government and we had like FedRAMP that's used for guidance for the cybersecurity things. What is being done there? And I'll silence my mic now.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, David. It's a really good point. And I think that more broadly, stepping back outside of the DAO context, I think that there are so many learnings that have to take place within Web3 more broadly from a cybersecurity standpoint. And so looking at organizations, like NIST, looking at groups like IEEE, where so many cybersecurity experts, contribute great work. There is this question of how do you build better cybersecurity standards around DeFi in general? I think that DAOs in a way are sort of epiphenomenal of many of the cybersecurity issues that we see in DeFi, the big hacks, the bridge failures. Those are things that are going to affect DAOs, and we've seen the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funds, due to those hacks and exploits. But at the same time, I think, again, the question is how can the DeFi ecosystem, the Web3 ecosystem more broadly, actually plug into the work that's going on in places like IEEE, like NIST, to make sure that those cybersecurity standards are incorporated into the roadmaps of things like DAOs and DeFi protocols.
I think, Gora, you have a question?
Yeah, sure. Have you all done any exploration on what are the two edge cases? That is where DAO just does not work. And the other one is, yes, this is the perfect example of a DAO is the only solution.
Yes. Yeah, no, so it's a really great question. And I think that what we've seen is, it's no coincidence that many of the early DAOs that we've seen gain momentum and gain steam really fast are financial in nature. They are DAOs that are allocating capital, they are making investments, they are raising money to do things like try and purchase one of the 13 remaining copies of the US Constitution. The DAOs that are focused on a financial task like that, I think that by the nature of crypto and by the nature of the underlying technologies they're using, that makes DAOs, and because those objectives can be so clearly spelled out, those are well suited in many ways to being automated, and that means that DAOs are a good option there. Some of the more challenging use cases, and I don't want to say that they're bad use cases, but I do think they're more challenging, are the DAOs that are more social in nature. So if you are a DAO that's trying to govern, for instance, a decentralized social network or a community, we've seen some great examples of DAOs do that at a small scale. The question for me is, how do you then scale that up? How do you make sure that a social network, a community DAO, that those are actually getting meaningful engagement from the participants in a way that it makes sense to have that structured as a DAO versus as a traditional centralized organization? And I think that the outcome of that remains to be seen. We've got, again, this space is filled with experiments that are ongoing. Time will only tell what the right use cases are for DAOs and how the term itself will evolve over the years.
So maybe, Adrian, the follow-up question would be, do you envisage a centralized organization with multiple DAOs, or the other way around, an overarching DAO with centralized branches?
So, the way that we are seeing the space move now is more towards the latter. So one thing, again, that we're going to get into in the toolkit is operationally, you see many DAOs that are saying, we want the benefits of participant engagement that come from decentralization, but also of skill sets that come from specialization. So we're seeing tools like Orca, which is a tool for working group creation within DAOs, that are bringing together, for instance, cybersecurity experts, financial experts on working groups with very specialized functions who have background knowledge that sort of make them well suited to that goal. So we're seeing, not a DAO of DAOs, but a kind of DAO of smaller working groups that are centralized to some extent, evolving in a lot of cases. That's one of those hybrid iterations that is beginning to become popular in the space.
Cool. Just to add to your earlier point, like if a DAO is like, for example, like an investment club, and they're just investing on like buy an NFT, or they're purely staying in the digital world, it seems to work to somewhat reasonably okay. But then it's a social DAO where they have to hire people to do work.
Right.
Then there's a friction between the digital world and the real world where you have to do contracting and hire people. Like how do you it just that becomes complicated. I think you kind of mentioned that, right? Like where I think Gora was asking where it works well, where it doesn't work. It seems like if everything is staying on the crypto world, digital, it's fine. But if you have to start hiring people to do real things,
yes,
it's
really
trickier.
It's trickier. Absolutely. No, I think that's a great sum up. And many of those challenges that you're alluding to, Ramesh, are also covered in the upcoming toolkit. So again, that will be a good place where we'll house some of those findings as well.
I think there's one more question there. Do you have a plan to provide a reference DAO architecture?
So that's not part of our plan. That's not the role that the forum, plans to play in this space. But that said, there are reference DAO architectures. There are reference, governance templates, that you can download that are available. We have some of those referenced as well in the toolkit, not in a prescriptive way. We don't go out and say, these are the architectures you should use, these are the governance frameworks you should use, but we do provide those lists because we think they're a good starting place for organizations or individuals that are looking to go deeper into the space. And yes, I will share that. I just saw that last point. Let me share that link.
The
right
one-on-one paper? Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Perfect. And then, Aiden, I think you're looking for experts to participate in some of the studies you're doing. You could make an announcement. You may have people on this call who might be.
Thank you. Yeah, that is actually a great follow-up. So yes, if I have one ask for you all, and I just post the link to the first paper in the chat, it is to join this community. So as I mentioned, we've got about just over 100 experts around the world that are contributing to this work. If you want to contribute to the work of the toolkit, the Impact DAO's work in particular, please send me an email because we would love to have a chat, get you plugged in.
Yeah, I think maybe if you could, I don't know if you're okay to put your email address in the chat.
Yep, let me do that now. It's a great point.
Folks who are interested in contributing to this work, you could reach out to Aiden directly.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Aiden. I don't see any more questions. We are 10 minutes over time, so so I think we're good.
Great.
To close it.
Before we close, let me stop the recording. First of all, thank you, Aiden, for the excellent talk. We really loved it. And we have a strong community of over 1,500 folks who have come together for this forum and conference. We can help push the word out for your organization's volunteering. So send us some text. We can always do that for you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Great.
And have a great rest of the event.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.